Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Knife Makers Friday 5. The right tool can change your life. Let's talk about it. So I've been on a little bit of a knife making tool jag this year. About a year ago, I started making this tang tapering tool right here that I make for Pop's Knife Supply. And then earlier in the year, this year, I started working on this cool little vise for knife makers. So just quickly, for some of you guys who haven't seen some of these tools recently, this tang tapering tool, people have been using magnets to hold on to blades for eons, and this is just kind of a spin on that basic idea. But you got magnets inset into this thing, and then this is kind of the cool part of this, I would say. And this idea originally, as far as I know, was Andy Roy from Fiddleback Forge who had this idea. There's a little pin through here, and you can increment this pin out and go through the whole of your tang and hold on to it for tapering tangs and for flattening things and for almost like a surface grinder kind of thing. It's a real simple, elegant tool and a nice spin on this old idea of just a magnet. So anyway, that's one. Another tool that I've been working on is this knife maker's vise. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Some of you guys have probably seen information about this in some of my other videos. So the original idea was really for drilling irregular stuff like bone and antler, but it turns out that it has a ton of other uses. And that's kind of one of the fun things about making tools, is that you often find, hey, I made this tool to do this one specific thing, and then there are all these other cool little things that you can do with it. Again, this is something I specifically do for Pop's Knife Supply. Anyway, neither of these ideas were really mine, but they kind of got me thinking. Over the years, I've done a lot of tools for knife makers, particularly kind of Japanese sword-related stuff. But I've also got a lot of ideas over the years that I've kind of accumulated for knife-making gizmos, just for, knife makers in general. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and how those can help really change things for you as a knife maker. So with that in mind, I'll tell you about some of the tools that I've made recently, and then maybe share a little bit about the value of being able to make your own tools. So I've been making this saya making chisel right here. It's known as the saya nomi in Japanese. It has a little bend in the handle. It has a belly to the cutting edge. And these are specifically useful for making Japanese sword scabbards. I've been making those probably for 20 years or something like that. Anyway, it's a super handy tool, not just for making Japanese scabbards. Another tool that I've been making for quite a long time, this is a Japanese marking knife. I don't offer these regularly, but it's just another cool little tool that every now and then I'll make a few of them and put them for sale on my Walter Sorrells Blades website. But recently, I've started, and really it was kind of, I guess you would say it was spurred on by, doing these things for Pops, which are, really neat little tools. And, I started thinking, hey, look, I've got all these ideas, I ought to start working on them. And so this right here is a tool that I've been working on. I mean, I originally had the idea probably 7-8 years ago, I don't know, something like that. And I started doing some design work on it, and then ultimately I didn't do anything with it just because I didn't have the right machine to make this tool. Anyway, I am super excited about this. Many of you probably are familiar with the idea of plate quenching. So the way you harden a knife is you heat it up to somewhere between 1500 and maybe 2000 degrees, depending on the kind of steel, and then you cool it down very rapidly. And when you cool it down, it's very common for it to warp when you're quenching it. So plate quenching is something that a lot of knife makers do these days, where you take two pieces of aluminum, usually big old thick pieces of aluminum plate, and when you're quenching the knife, you squash them between those two plates. That keeps the piece of steel in line, and you get a nice straight knife coming out of the quench. Hey guys, let me jump in here to mention that I'm only able to do these because of your support on Patreon. If you like what I'm doing here, if you see value in the years and years of gear reviews and tutorials that I've done here on YouTube, I'd earnestly ask you to pitch in and help out. In return, you'll have access to years and years of plans for knife builds and cool tools that I've made during all the time that I've been on YouTube. Sincere thanks to all the guys who are helping out the channel. All right, back to it. So I've done that for a long time in a very jury-rigged sort of way, and this right here is intended to replace my old plate quenching rig with something that is just way better in a variety of ways. So, the basic idea is you just have two pieces of aluminum here, and you put your knife in here and squash it down. Now, that in and of itself, there's nothing interesting about. There are a million ways of plate quenching things, and this is just one of them. What's different about this is that it has little channels through the center, and so water is going to be pumped through there, and that's going to cool the plate. Now, why would you want to go to all that trouble? If you plate quench one knife or two knives, this is not an issue. There's no reason to do something like this. You get your two plates, and you can have them in a vise on a workbench, or you can just use two big plates and squash them by hand. It doesn't really matter. You squash that piece of steel, and then you're done. However, if you're somebody who makes a bunch of knives at a time, what will happen is that these plates will get hotter and hotter. It's not so much just that they might burn your hands or whatever, but they're going to be causing different things to happen during the quench because they're not quenching at exactly the same rate, and this makes, potentially for less predictable quenches. And also, they get harder to handle and so on and so forth. So in an ideal world, you want those quenching plates to be the same temperature all the time. So this allows you to use a simple little fish tank pump to pump water through here. It doesn't have to be ice water or anything like that. Just regular old room temperature water will work fine. And another thing is typically when you plate quench, you use compressed air, with a little air gun, and you blow air in there, and that brings the temperature down a little bit quicker. So this little rig not only has water pumping through it, but it also has an air hose so that there's a quick connect on here. You can connect an air hose to it, blow some compressed air through here using this little ball valve, turn it off, and then you're ready to take it out and move on to your next knife. So this idea, if you've used quench plates much, is fairly obvious as far as I'm concerned. I don't think of this as being a particularly interesting innovation. Like I say, I came up with this idea probably 6 years ago, something like that, but I didn't have a big enough work envelope in my mill at the time to make this. I've got a bigger mill now, and so I finally got around to making it the way I wanted to. There are other guys who've made similar things. Like I said, this is a pretty, to me, kind of obvious idea. John Grimsmo, I know, has something kind of similar to this. But anyway, something I've been meaning to do for quite a few years, and I'm super happy that I finally got around to doing it. I'm thinking about selling these. I don't know for sure if I will or not, but if it's something that, might benefit you, by all means, shoot me an email. Down in the description, there's information about how you can get in contact with me. I don't know exactly how much these are, how much I'm going to have to charge for them. They're not going to be cheap. There's a ton of aluminum in here. I'm thinking about making some that'll be a little bit smaller. Maybe, I'm not sure if I really need to be running water through both the top and the bottom plate. It might be that I can run water just through the bottom, use a little bit smaller plate on the top that doesn't have channels milled into it, and it'll be cheaper to make. So, in terms of this as a commercial product, you know, we'll see. I'll let you know in the future if I do want to make some of these. But if you're somebody who does plate quench a lot of stuff, I think you'll probably see the value of this very easily. Now, you may not be sold on this idea. This may seem like one of these over-engineered things that is not worth the effort. It really depends on kind of your workflow, how many knives you make, and all that sort of thing. I'm not trying to sell you on it. This is an idea that I know is going to be useful for me, but let me just kind of tell you what the benefits are, you know, from my perspective anyway, versus, you know, just using plates in a vise or whatever it might be. So the first benefit, obviously, as I described, is that it's going to keep these plates cool, and, you know, that's going to make for consistent plate quenches. Second main benefit is you got your compressed air built into this, so you know, they're basically just on this bottom plate. There are a whole ton of little tiny holes. Well, you know, I still haven't run this thing, so I'm going to see how this works out. But you know, I'm pretty hopeful about it. The advantage there is that, you know, normally when you're plate quenching, if you're doing it by yourself, it's one of those three-handed kind of jobs. So you're doing stuff with the steel and the plate, and you're trying to juggle grabbing the air gun and blowing air. What this allows you to do is, you know, it'll be super easy to do. You got a pair of tongs here, you stick it in there, you hit the ball valve, and it's going to blow some air through there, and it's an easy two-handed job. Third advantage is that you can do a bunch of knives at a time. It's kind of normal if you're trying to plate quench and you're trying to do a couple at a time, you know, depending on how you do it. If you do it in a vise, it's vertical and you really can only do one at a time comfortably. This allows you, you know, depending on the size of your knives, this is 12 by 10 inches. You could probably do 4 in here. I'm going to have to experiment with it and see how it works out, but it will mean that you can gang the blades that you're bringing out, and you know, that'll speed things up for you a little bit. So some other, you know, less obvious advantages of this. You'll notice this is kind of this George Foreman grill type thing, and this flops around like this, and that might look like a bad idea. You might want something in theory that was straight up and down, like if you had a vise or an arbor press or something like that, it's going to maintain a real square position, whereas this is moving around. So if you've got a knife like a chef's knife, or maybe a tapered tang knife, or I mean really anything that has some kind of big taper built into it, a forged knife would be a typical example of that, Bowies and things like that. If you just have flat plates, depending on how they're set up, especially if you have them in a vise or maybe an arbor press or something like that, they come completely square, and as a result, they're not going to conform to the shape of the blade, to that taper, particularly if you got a lot of distal taper. The advantage of this is that it allows you, this is going to rock, and so as you come down on that knife, if it has distal taper to it, this plate, which has a little bit of play in it, is going to conform to the shape of that knife and give you a nice consistent pressure on the knife. So anyway, I have just finished this thing, so I literally haven't even had a chance to test it. I mean, in theory, it might not work, but I'm highly confident that it's going to do the basic job. You know, in a nuancey sort of way, there may be a lot of little changes that I'm going to want to make to this. You know, I want to measure just how well it cools. I want to, like I said, the top plate may be unnecessary. The cooling of the top plate may be unnecessary. So I'll probably run it both with coolant going through the top and bottom and just the bottom. And, you know, see if I can save a little bit of money if I make some more of these by not having water running through the top. So, you know, in other words, this is basically a prototype. I'll try it out, use it myself a bunch, and see how it works out. And once I figure out what I like and don't like about it, I'll let you guys know. All right, so let me wrap up a little bit about making your own tools. These are kind of fancy tools, or at least, I mean, this is not a super fancy tool, but it's something that, you know, that I'm doing in a reasonably fancy way. In other words, I'm making it on a CNC machine. But I want to tell you, just because I'm showing you these reasonably complex tools does not mean that I'm telling you that every tool that you make as a knife maker needs to be super complicated. You know, when I first got started, I made a lot of tools that were stuff like this. I'm not even going to bother to tell you what this tool does because it's a super obscure Japanese sword related thing. But my point is that when I got started, you know, one of the things that I found, and to this day I still find it, and that's why this tool is here. One of the things that I have always found, and everybody who makes things, you know, runs into this same thing themselves, you start making something and then you hit this point where you start getting irritated because stuff just doesn't want to fall into place in a smooth way. Every knife maker makes different kinds of knives, and so you're going to run into different problems. And so what I've always felt like is, if I run into a point where I start getting really irritated with my workflow or how things, you know, are coming together, that may be because I don't have a tool that does this one little thing that I need. Now, it's always worth giving it, you know, 10 minutes thought and saying, hey, could I make some kind of little tool? And it might be something as simple as this little piece of cutting board here. Or it might be something more complex like this plate quenching gizmo here. But the point is that if you give yourself a few minutes when you start getting irritated with something to think, hey, is there some way to solve this thing, and so that henceforth I will never have to be irritated about this if I make some little tool. Often there is a tool that'll solve that problem. And again, you know, I've got instances of just old tools that I made. Again, most of these are for Japanese things. This is something I call a habaki slammer. And, you know, I used to have all these things that were made out of wood and stuff. I mean, really, really crude tools. But they solved some kind of problem, and once you made them, it was amazing how useful those things were. And like I said earlier, sometimes you kind of circle back and you find that there's a tool that you made to do X, and it also does Y, and that is really gratifying. So my general point here is that, you know, the cool thing about knife making is we're all doing this more or less for fun. I mean, for me, this is a business, yes, but the reason I got into it is because it's fun, and I try to keep it interesting and keep it lively so that I'm always solving new problems. I mean, that's why this exists, you know, is you run into a problem, you get irritated with it, and you try to come up with a solution. And sometimes that's as gratifying as making a nice knife. All right, well, I'll knock off there. But anyway, like I said earlier, if this looks like something that might be useful to you, by all means, you know, shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And, you know, maybe somewhere down the road a few months, I might, you know, crank a few of these out and sell them. You know, it might be something that would solve some problems for you as well as for me. So anyway, look for me to demonstrate it in a video soon. I haven't tried it literally at all yet, so I may find that there are a bunch of things that I don't like about it. You know, this little rocky thing, I think this is going to be very useful, but, you know, it might just turn out to be a pain in the neck, and it'd be better for it to just kind of go straight down on the knives. We'll see. All right, guys, well, thanks for following along with my little knife making journey, and you know, keep on making knife tools. All this kind of stuff, you can do this stuff too, and it's great if somebody has already thought through a problem and they can sell you a tool that'll solve, you know, a problem for you and save you some time. But like I said, it's always fun solving these problems for yourself too. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years. So I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.